everyone, and welcome to 2024 Something Wicked DocuFest. I am your host, Kevin L. Powers. I'm also the festival director and program director of this event and all of Something Wicked's events, including our main film festival, which is in August. And we are here to talk about the film Game of NIM. And to speak about his film is Robert Emmons.
Emmons, yes.
Okay, I'm saying it right. Emmons. I should have asked you that before, but I didn't ask you. All right, so Robert, I want you to tell everyone a little bit about first what you did on your film, and then exactly what is the film itself, so that people have an idea of what Game of NIM is.
Yeah. So this is a film that I kind of I've done sort of from the ground up myself. I wrote the project. I filmed and directed the project, except for my daughter actually helped on this one. She did camera work on a couple of things because I'm actually in this project, part of the film, which I didn't expect at first, but kind of the film took me in on its journey, and that's kind of really built into the film itself, is the journey of the film. And so Game of NIM is ostensibly about the history of this weird computer game that premiered at the 1939-1940 World's Fair, but the film kind of goes off the rails from there and becomes something else, because it's what happened to me in the making of the film, and I kind of let that take over.
Now, and we'll get into some of the other aspects of the actual film itself. But what I really liked is the fact that it started off as one project, but as you got more into it and you put a little bit of yourself in the film, it evolved into something else. That's
right.
One aspect of the film I actually really liked, and so it wasn't like just a history lesson of the game of NIM itself, but it was something else. Like you said, a journey. How was that for you as an experience? Since you just said that this isn't one of the films that you don't normally put yourself in the film.
Yeah, so I've made a number of feature films, and I'm working currently on a feature film about a rare computer game that played only in a few arcades in the 80s in America, and actually it played in my local arcade, and it's always been a fascination of mine. And while I was working on that film and doing research, I came upon this other obscure, what is the first electronic game. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And then I was experimenting with doing some 3D modeling. And so I said, let me see if I can make my own 3D model of this game. And I did. And I was like, well, let me make a little short about this. Who knows where it will go? I don't know. I got distracted by it. But then as I was making it, I sort of got distracted by a larger cultural issue, social issue, political issue that was, really been on my mind for many years. And as I'm making the film, this thing keeps happening in America. It keeps happening in America. And I kept saying to myself, man, how can I make a film about a dumb game when, people are being shot and killed all the time in America, and I was like, it feels stupid to pursue this, like, when this is going on. And then I just said, you know what, let that take over the film, see what happens, when you try to do one thing, but you just can't, because your mind and sort of your heart are pulled in another direction. And I think that's kind of, what's going on in America in some ways.
Yeah, that's one of the aspects I really loved about the film, especially the way you ended it, which I am not going to give away because I think people need to watch it so they can take this journey like you do by the time you get to the end of it. I really like the way the film ended, because it's not the way you would expect it being an audience watch, a viewer, because you start off as being this guy who comes across this random weird game, and you kind of focus on the history of that. But like I said, your journey is what is so fascinating with this film, because I'm watching it thinking, oh, it's going to be a history of this odd game that, and to be honest, I think I may have played this game. This game seemed so familiar to me for some reason. I just never, either it was called something else or I just didn't realize I was playing the game in NIM. But that's what kept me going while.
Yeah. Many people have sort of played iterations of it over, like, and I show in the film there have been like board game versions and little electronic game versions. And I think the history of the actual game of the game that inspired the electronic version, that's interesting too. But like I said, for me, it was how the myself and the film were getting pulled because, you know, as I was making the film, instances keep happening. And so, you know, I let those invade the film. And I don't know if you've noticed, and some people have, and some people haven't, but the film itself is filled with subliminal imagery and metaphorical stuff. So actually, every time I'm talking to the camera in the film, it's all a metaphor for what the ending of the film is about. Like, so you could take everything I'm saying and apply it to the problem that I'm really trying to address, and you'll be like, oh, I see now. So really the whole thing is a metaphor for what the ending is, which kind of is also built on this sort of AI dream, right? Which gets back to what I thought was really interesting as I'm making this thing, is that in 1939 and 1940, that's one of the most famous world fairs that there are in American history. And that world fair was called the World of Tomorrow, right? And the big promise of that was this utopian future that would be made through technology and advancement in humanity. And so I kept thinking to myself, what would they say about where we are now? And would they be like, oof, I don't know, you've missed the mark a bit, or not? And so that was sort of in the face of it too. Have we gotten to this utopia that was promised, you know, in 1939, 1940?
Yes, but the way you integrate the yourself in the 3D modeling, I love the way you explain that too. You explain it, and then you kind of you after you've shown the bits of it. If I remember correctly, forgive me if I'm not remembering it correctly, because I've seen
you got it.
films. Sometimes I forget. But if I remember correctly, you show your 3D model first, and then you explain to the audience exactly how you came about it, and then later in the film you go to the robot at the World's Fair, which I thought was brilliant. And then of course it segues into the very end of the film, which is why I say your journey is just really interesting to me, because you're right. I didn't think about it till you mentioned it. Your metaphors are there. I just didn't see them the first time I saw it. Now seeing them now, because you just explained it to me.
And so when if you look carefully in the background at times, or even there is flash embedded subliminal messages in the film, like old school embedded frames and stuff throughout. Sometimes people see them and they're like, what was that? And sometimes they don't, you know, just like subliminal goes. But the whole thing with the 3D was at that moment too, where I show myself, and I was, like you say, I was connecting it to Electro, the robot who was at the World's Fair. And then of course the ending when we see the AI version of the creator. But I also wanted that moment when you see me talking and it's this weird 3D version, and then it devolves and you see me on the green screen when I take the phone call. I wanted that to also be a cue for the audience, like, whoa, like something weird is going on here. It's not just this classic historical documentary with the voiceover narrator doing the thing like how it opens, right? Yeah. That something else is going on that's a little disturbing, which is also a part of the metaphor. Like something is going on that's a little disturbing, and we have to look at this thing deeper. Yeah.
Yeah, but you linking it to like the one of the most famous World's Fair, and the thing is, I was familiar with that World's Fair as well because of the World of Tomorrow, and that's popped up in several movies that I've watched over the years, or decades. Let me rephrase it: decades.
Yes,
watched a lot of movies, so I can't say which of the years I've actually seen them. So I was familiar with that World's Fair. So when you were showing that footage, I was like, oh wow, he had footage of that.
Yeah.
And of course, your journey of trying to get the original, I think it was the original game of NIM that you
the machine was called the Nimitron, the electronic version. Yeah. And that was me like really trying to track it down and find out if it existed or not. And calling those various museums,
Oh,
and so, but at some points in the film, like, I in a way mean to trick the audience, but also in a way I don't mean to trick the audience with that. Like, this for me is a documentary, but there are some uh contrived parts in it too that are meant to reinforce that metaphor.
yeah.
So some of the stuff in it is created and not real in the film. But like I'm a very big fan of the documentary filmmaker Werner Herzog, and he sort
Yeah.
of has this notion of what he calls the ecstatic truth, right? And I'm a film professor. I teach documentary, and I often talk to my students in my classes about the difference between like fact and truth, and like we can have a bunch of facts, which sometimes, most often, are correct, sometimes are incorrect, and then we might have truths that don't align with those facts. Um, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're at odds. And often we have sort of a like Herzog has his ecstatic truth, which is the the highest truth that's isn't dependent upon facts if they don't speak. Like, and you see that in some of his films, like Little Dieter Needs to Fly or Grizzly Man, where he's not beholden to the facts of the story because he's trying to get at the ecstatic truth of the film. So I'm kind of tapping into some of that concept too in this there's some moments where I play with history. Like, for instance, you probably don't remember, but at one point I show that there's an NRA booth at the World's Fair. But I created that for the film at one point. They're walking into it, and I just composited an actual scene from the World's Fair at that time, but I changed the building so it looks like it's part of the NRA as part of that film. But that, was in my sort of efforts of getting at the ecstatic truth of the film, I think.
And was it hard trying to get all this archival footage together at all, or?
I consider this one wasn't that difficult, and that's like one of the I have a lot of fun with that. Another reason why I, was sort of pursuing this film too, I thought, I've made a number of documentaries that have been dependent upon interviews and stuff. The last couple of features I did a film about the history of film censorship, which I think played at something wicked, I thought, at the main festival. I could be wrong, but I thought it did. It's called Sickies Making Films, but that had a really big film festival presence. It played
Okay.
a lot of places all over, and that's about the history of film censorship. And before that, I made a film about the history of comic book censorship in the 50s in Frederick Wortham. And those films, I had to interview a lot of people and fly all over America. And the new film was kind of the new sort of feature I'm doing is requiring a lot of moving about like that. And I thought, like, man, I want to make a film where I can just sit in my house and make it and use like archival material, which I really like finding. And fortunately, there's a lot of archival material that's available about that World's Fair. So that is one of the World's Fairs where there's a lot going on archivally, because it's also the World's Fair where television makes its public appearance. So it's sort of special for that reason too. And I've always been fascinated with World's Fairs, and that one in particular. Like, as you said, it's inspired movies, it's inspired themes at Disney World, right? The World of Tomorrow and all that jazz. So it's one that's been important in American history for a number of reasons. And so there was lots out there on it to use, both promotional that the World's Fair made itself and through other companies. Like, I use a large portion of the Westinghouse promotional video that they made because they had and that's what the Game of NIM was, part of a Westinghouse exhibit. But they've made an archival film, and there's also all kinds of personal films that people made on Super 8 cameras, and a lot of that was available on archive.org, which is a huge resource for lots of documentary filmmakers, where it puts films out. Yeah.
Nice. So I have to ask, how long did it take you to put the film together because of going through all this footage and then creating the story that you?
Yes, this film took, and I sort of kept a diary of making the film, and because I wanted to see, because some documentaries, you know how this goes. Like I've had documentaries take 3 years to make. I've made a feature length in 18 months, and I wanted to see how long this film would take. And this film took 8 months to make this film. Yeah. And I was happy with that. I was sort of pleased with how that. But I was fortunate. I was on sabbatical with my job, so I was able to just concentrate on making projects. And this is actually part of a trio of films that all deal with violence in America in novel ways. And all the films have the same ending. I wanted to see if I could make 3 films that all have the same ending, in sort of. So
Okay.
one of the other films is an 8-minute film, and the other one's another 20-minute film. It's sort of horror specific. It's like a those old late night horror shows where there's like a guest who introduces the movie. That's the conceit for the film, where I play this sort of late night horror host. It's performative too, and I talk about this piece of horror history between these two guys, and it's a real story. And I use AI in that too to have them read their letters to each other. So it was sort of part of this larger experiment in kind of looking at this theme through different weird ways that people aren't expecting.
Okay. Well, you should definitely send us that film to play in our main film
Yeah,
festival.
because when I was making it, I was like, this is for film, this is for festivals interested in horror, because it deals with this piece of horror history, between this letter writing exchange between between a horror comics writer and this very famous psychologist who tried to say horror comics were ruining children and tried to stop them in America. And it's about their letter exchange, where sort of they're enemies, but then they become friends, right? And so it's about this, how when we talk, when we have conversations, that you can get somewhere with that kind of thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have to ask, because I asked this of a lot of filmmakers, what was the
Yeah.
most difficult aspect of doing this film?
Yeah, definitely the most difficult aspect was creating a 3D model of the Nimitron machine, because I didn't know this was technology I didn't know, and I sort of had to teach myself from the ground up. So I spent a good couple of months learning how to 3D model using not a crazy high-end piece of software that a lot of architects use that to do modeling and stuff like that. So teaching myself how to do that took took a long time. That was the hardest thing, and it was frustrating. There were times when it was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like what's happening? Because as a filmmaker, you get proficient in. I feel like I'm a pretty decent editor. I know technology really well, but 3D. It was like working in the 3D world was sort of something I had to wrap my brain around in a very new way, and using this program called SketchUp. So that was difficult.
Well, yeah, when I was watching you, kind of go through how all that worked for your film, I was like, good thing I'm not doing that because I don't know anything about what you're doing. I've just
Yeah.
shot like regular movies and makeup artists. I hire them for my films.
Yeah.
And documentaries, I don't have to do any of that.
Yeah. And I
Uh,
knew, and I knew I'm pretty proud of the way the model of the actual Nimitron game looks, which is easier because it's a piece of technology. I know that, I'm happy with how I and the creator look. I know we don't look realistic, but I didn't really want it to. I wanted there to be something, I talk about this uncanny valley. We hear that when we hear about 3D, and I wanted it to be weird looking, and it is. So I'm pleased with how that came out.
I'm actually I'm thankful that I learned where you got your footage from, because I know a lot of other filmmakers out there who are listening to this and watching this will have a better idea of where to look for archival footage. It's something for some reason I've never bothered to look up. I haven't done an archival type of documentary before. Most of
Mhm.
have been talking heads or me gathering footage. Like you wanted to do something that wasn't talking heads. I'm like, man, maybe I need to find a ideal to do something that has some archival footage.
Yeah, but it often is hard. I've always wanted to do probably more like you do, where, I've always wanted to make a and kind of this partial is like to make more of a verite film documentary where it's just me filming, and then you bring that together like Frederick Wiseman and like make a cut of it. Now that's hard filmmaking, but also it's laborious to try to find clips. The last feature that I made, and I made it with a partner of mine. His name's Joe Trapea. The film called Sicky's Making Films. We depended on not so much archival film, but that film is based on using a lot of movie clips. So we in the edit of that film, I compiled over 250 clips from films over the years, and the biggest expense of that film and difficulty was clearing all of those through lawyers to make sure that we were able to use them all under fair use. So the largest part of the budget of that film was to just, the clip. It was fun finding films to make points and talk about the history of film censorship, but the legal fees and making sure that we cleared, and lawyers would be like, I don't know, you seem to use too much of this, or it doesn't seem to be transformative enough to your topic, and you would make an argument back, and the lawyer would say, okay, that makes sense. And then they would say, but ultimately the caveat is we won't know unless it goes to a court of law and someone tries to sue you. But it seems like it clears fair use. Now, fortunately, no one's tried to sue us, and it's all been good. But so I'm used to like digging and finding footage that you need to and that's kind of the part I really like, is to get in the trenches with that kind of thing. The sort of the more tedious post-production stuff I can really get lost in.
I've never had to do that myself, so it was just interesting. I mean, the way you had to do it for your film, and you're the third filmmaker I've talked to this year in regards to using archival footage and where they got it, and all three of you have gotten your stuff from different places. It's been really talk to you.
Yeah. I just got lucky that archive.org, which also has a sub-site as part of it. It's called the Prelinger Archives. And there was a guy who left a library of footage, historical footage, particularly from the early 20th century America. And so that was like right in the wheelhouse for this film. And that's where a lot of this World's Fair stuff, both the footage that corporations put out and people's home movies that have, been uploaded to this site, was really invaluable. And, I traveled to a couple of archives for the film to tell the story, the archive that housed the stuff about the Nimitron and its creator. And I got his voice to use in the film from, as I explained, like that's real, like, hours of footage. Some of it is like, it's sort of played with at the end, but the hours of footage that I got for his interviews and much of the film is really him, and that I had to travel to the archives and find that stuff. Fortunately, I lived close. It was right down in Maryland, so I could drive from here pretty easily.
Oh, okay. I can't fathom driving to a bunch of different warehouses to actually get the actual footage. I'm hoping that archive.com has everything digitized, so
they have most of it digitized. But this was, this was fun for me. I got to travel to the archive that they have down there. It's a physics archive, and New York Public Library. I got to go to a couple of times for some resources. That was great. So I traveled to and the the Library of Congress's archives and National Archives had some stuff. So I did some traveling to get some materials and do some research for this film. That was kind of fun.
So I'm not telling everyone the ending, but did you get a lot of the ending footage from that archive, the last one you just said? Or
I got the audio that was the basis for that in the end. Yeah. That was able to feed the AI in a way. Yes.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's been great speaking with you about your film.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Too much more, but I do want to ask you, for people who are watching your film, is there any final words you want to leave with them, or something that they might you want them to get from watching your film?
Yeah, I think it's a strange film, so I appreciate you having it in the festival. And I knew it I thought it might be a hard sell for some people, only because you don't quite know what you're getting into. So I just say, give the film a chance and and I say don't look away from the screen because there's a lot going on and some things will pop up that will cue you in. So keep your eyes peeled to the screen and hang in there with it because I think it has a powerful payoff. And I think it's something that we need to think about as citizens, in this country.
I will second that because now when I go back and rewatch it, I'll look for those subliminal messages more when I rewatch it. I also like to tell everyone out there who's watching the film or is on the fence on watching the film the ideal of going back to the New York World's Fair, the World of Tomorrow, and actually looking at the Nimitron. Nimitron is what it's
That's
called.
right. Yep.
The Nimitron and the actual game of NIM and that whole aspect is also fascinating, but also the fact that this is a journey of a filmmaker whose subject matter starts off as one thing but ends up something else. That's a great aspect for any young filmmaker out there trying to figure out how to make their films. And this film is relatively, I think, 30 minutes long, so
That's right.
it's like a longer short film. So
Yeah.
and it plays really well. The pacing is really well. So
Thank
you
you.
feel like it's 30 minutes long. But I like this because it did use filmmaker footage of his personal journey and the fact that it used archival footage, which I've never used before. So that gives me something else to look forward to.
Thank
But I want everyone to watch the film to enjoy it for those aspects. And also, it's a very interesting filming in regard to the game that is played in there. You might figure out that you probably played it before in some iteration in your lifetime, like I did. That being said, I want to thank you, Robert, for allowing
Thank
me to interview you and for allowing us to screen your film at the 2024 Something Wicked DocuFest.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me be a part of the festival. I appreciate it. And thank you for the interview. Yeah, I was going to say, man, I need to bring you everywhere with me in this film, but I have this video, so I'm going to play this wherever, because you just did a great job selling it, I'll have to say.
By all means, like I said, you'll get the video, so it's all for you. And everyone who's listening and watching the film, every one of these filmmakers get these videos so they can use them to help them promote their films. And we hope that you're actually, if you're a young filmmaker out there and not have all the guidance that you think that you have or that you want, please watch these videos because they have invaluable information in regards to these filmmakers who made their films and some of the stuff that they used in them, like archive.com or .org.
Archive.org.
Archive.org because these are some invaluable resources that you can use for making your own films. So with that, I want to thank you all for watching this video on Something Wicked DocuFest 2024. By all means, make sure to go see the movie Game of NIM, and don't forget some of the other amazing films we have screening this weekend. Make sure to also check out this filmmaker's other films because this is just part 1 of 3, and I'm going to be searching out the other 2 myself. So with that, thank you so much and have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.